Hold it! Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! Now, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
So I'm joined by an incredible Twitter X personality, rock star, polymath of the Crystal Millennium Kingdoms.
Nice to meet you, Jin. As we were speaking in the kind of the pre verse to the conversation, it's so wonderful to finally put a voice to the avatar and to the persona. As you know, I also am quite a fan of your posting and your personality in general, and I love to see the way you flame people online by quote tweeting them and drawing them into these conversations where you basically give them enough rope to hang themselves on it. And it's so wonderful to be here, having an opportunity to speak with you. This is my first podcast appearance that I've made since I've more or less debuted online for the last year and a half or so. I mean, aside from my band, I don't really do a lot of real promotional efforts or any kind of guest appearances or anything like that. But I have a feeling that perhaps following this episode, I might start doing it a little more often.
Well, I definitely think you should. And do you want to promo? I don't know if you want to talk about your band or music at all, but if you want to promo it, totally go for it. And any other projects that you have that you want to shout out. And sure, I'll let you do this at the end too, and it will all be in the show notes too. So just so everybody knows.
Sure, great. Yeah, no, I'll definitely plug my band. I'm the frontman and guitarist, singer of the band Glass Classic. We're currently a two-piece sort of progressive power pop, shoegaze, sort of heavy psychedelic band based out of Montreal. My bandmate and I have been playing together now for just about, say, 15 years off and on now. We sort of met in the underground scene. He was a proprietor of a underground venue in Montreal called Interstice for many years, where he booked a lot of, well-known mid to, small to mid-tier sort of indie acts and other sorts of bands like that. At the time, I'd actually been living in another Montreal venue called Friendship Cove, which was a very infamous underground sort of punk club, anarchist commune for many years. I sort of lived there at this sort of the tail end of it when it was sort of going through the hate cult phase, mostly dominated by bands like AIDS Wolf and such like that. So we just finished recording our new LP at the very famous Montreal studio, The Mighty Hotel Tatango, which some of your listeners might know is actually run by several of the members of the band Godspeed You Black Emperor. One of my favorite bands, and certainly one of the most important bands in the history of post-rock or even symphonic instrumental rock. Actually, our producer and engineer is actually their in-house engineer who does all of their recordings. So for anyone who's a fan of anything indie or shoegaze or heavy music, melodic music, really good songwriting, jazz-inspired sort of progressive stuff, or just post-rock in general, we'll probably get a lot out of our our new album. I hope people are familiar with the 15-minute set that we currently have up on YouTube. We tend to get a lot of flack for it because it's not necessarily the best sounding recording in the entire world, being that it was just shot in my downstairs bedroom in my house. But it's, synced to live 4K video. So I implore everyone who hasn't had a chance to check it out, watch it on YouTube in 4K. Our channel is currently no longer monetized, so you don't have to worry about giving us any ad revenue or anything like that. The videos are free to watch, and if anyone likes them, they could download the audio. But I implore everyone to check out our upcoming LP, Hands of Esau. So that sort of blends into the conversation we're going to have today, because the album itself is actually intended to sort of be a cleansing or healing recording of some kind, being that it has 7 main tracks on it, each one of which corresponds to a particular faculty of the soul, with the idea being that when you listen to the album, it will, in fact, sort of cleanse or heal these faculties, which, in our day and age are certainly clouded by all manner of external and internal noise. And of course, the name itself, Hands of Esau, relates to the passage in the book of Genesis where Yitzhak, who at this point is very blind, is tricked in some sense by his wife Rebecca into giving the blessing to Jacob, who was her favorite, versus his favorite, who was Esau, who Rebecca had the foresight to understand was in fact a violent, somewhat evil man. He's described in the Bible as being a man of the field, and a mighty hunter, which some people might associate with positive qualities, but in sort of biblical language means that he's a brute, so to speak. So the title itself, Hands of Esau, actually refers to when Jacob put on the garb of sheep in order to get close to his father to receive the blessing. And upon inspecting him closely, Yitzhak says, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And it's sort of a bit of it's kind of in a sense, a bit of a joke. It's sort of a commentary about the music industry in general, but it also really refers to the idea that what we're presenting is not necessarily what people think they might be getting. On the surface, it appears to be, very normie friendly, mainstream sounding sort of rock and roll, but it's actually intended to be a delivery device for a much deeper, more esoteric sort of truth that's intended to help people in their spiritual regeneration and also just in their day-to-day lives.
I have personally enjoyed your music. I've listened to it. I think your lyrics particularly stand out to me as maybe a entry-level student of Kabbalah. I think that I understand some things and I can hear a lot of your allusions and references, and I think it's incredible to be able to write like that. I aspire to that. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet, but I'm working on it. And I will also say that you have amazing musical taste just in general, but obviously it plays to my sort of love of J-rock and J-pop and anime soundtracks. So, but it is incredible, and I will include your video also in the show notes, like your YouTube link, so everybody can go look at that, check it out, check out your channel, and all of that.
As a bit of an aside, with regards to the new album and even the YouTube performance, there's one track on the YouTube performance called Falling Snow, which was what I consider to be an auto-composed or spiritually downloaded track. On the album itself, there's actually one other one called We Were Made in Light. And both of these tracks, but specifically We Were Made in Light, are songs that I myself did not actually really sit down and compose. In the case of We Were Made in Light, I had experienced sort of a traumatic event in my life in the immediate lead up to writing this song, and I was just sort of sitting for literally days at a time, and I suddenly had this inspiration to pick up my guitar, grab my handheld recorder, turn it on, and I performed the song from start to finish, having never played it before or considered it, having never sat down to work out the lyrics or the melody or anything like that. And I still have that original recording, and we try as best as possible to perform the song each time we play it to really embody that original version of the demo, so to speak, in which it was quite literally broadcast into my mind by angels. And Falling Snow is quite similar. I have several tracks like that actually, but on this album there's really only the two that were sort of downloaded in a sense.
Well, that makes sense to me because like I've said, I'm a little bit of a student, but for people who are unfamiliar with these kinds of ideas of light and life force, and perhaps where the specific throne of the angels sit um, in context to a snowflake, I thought maybe it's interesting if you want to expand on that and sort of give people an idea of what's going on in terms of light, sound, and life force.
Sure. Yeah, well, Falling Snow is a really good example because not only is it our shortest track, but it's also, in my opinion, really the mission statement for the whole album / even what we're trying to do artistically on the whole. So, I mean, on the surface, the song seems to be sort of simultaneously an optimistic statement about the state of the world. The very first lines that you hear, which actually start out as a verse, but then are repeated as a chorus for the remainder of the song with a slight key modification, are "Open up your eyes and behold a world of wonder. Do you feel the rising from within you now?" And that song really reflects the optimism that I feel and that we're trying to encourage with regards to, realizing that this world, so many people, especially students of esoteric traditions, people who are following, say, Eastern traditions, but also people that sort of go down a left-hand path, sort of nihilistic path, tend to see the apparent reality of, what is referred to in the Eastern tradition is, say, samsara, or the descent of souls through reincarnation. In Hebrew, we have a similar concept we refer to as Gilgulim, which is effectively a sort of a spiritual recycling process. And many people see this as sort of an inherently negative thing in the sense of, I'm trapped in this reality. All I see around me is suffering. But the point that we're trying to make really with this song is actually whether you've been here for one lifetime, or maybe this is your billionth lifetime, or even trillionth lifetime in some form. This is really a wonderful world filled with amazing mysteries, romance, and incredible adventures that could be had by all. And we're really trying to give people that motivation to experience the reality that they're in sort of as authentically as possible. And I mean, to accept the negative aspects of it and the positive aspects of it simultaneously. And as you mentioned about snowflakes, I mean, the hexagram is obviously a very important symbol, not only in Judaism, but also in Hinduism and Taoism. And you probably imagine almost any esoteric tradition because, frankly, if you go far enough back, we all are more or less influenced by the same set of symbols, the same concepts. And interestingly enough, snowflakes, while they are all unique, so to speak, I mean, there will be sort of superficial similarities between different classes of sort of snowflake forms or topology. They all do adhere to this sort of geometry. not unlike many other things we see in nature, such as beehives. Even the southern pole on Saturn has a hexagonal sort of geometry to it. So, of course, the hexagon is a very close approximation of a circle when given, relatively small number of sides. So you could see that even in nature, where we have certain continuous geometries. I mean, when you look at seashells, when you look at fruit, etc., you see the appearance of, say, things like the sacred rectangle or the phi ratio, very important in aesthetics, modern art, and also spirituality. But you also see these real very rigid geometric forms as well, like the what you see with the Platonic solids. These are just as present in material reality, especially in crystalline forms, anything that has any kind of structure to it, as these so-called continuous smooth forms. And actually in physics, the hexagon turns out to be a very important shape when considering certain types of behavior of conducting materials, what we call topological insulators or topological conductors, in which the model, what's referred to as the Kitaev model, which describes what is called the Ising spin. I'm sorry to introduce too much jargon, but the Ising model of a frustrated ferromagnet involves both electric and magnetic charges, which have certain associations with either the edges or the faces or the vertices rather of these hexagons. So a shape which appears ostensibly on the surface to be just a regular religious symbol, one that has a lot of different meanings to different people, appears very regularly in nature. So it's very much of my point of view that a lot of these religious traditions, a lot of the sort of esoteric symbology, it's really heavily reinforced by the nature of the material universe that we're living in, and to a great degree, you can find truth in these concepts by how they're reinforced by their natural presence.
That was an incredible explanation, so thank you for that. And I will say that I also agree with you. People who listened to the show before know I am a Vajrayana Buddhist, and I talk a lot about it. I'm sure people are tired of hearing about it. But I also feel it's very similar, I feel, to Judaism in many ways. And there are many people who have a Jewish ethnic and religious background who are both scholars and practitioners of Tantric Buddhism. So that's, I think, really interesting to note. And I think that the similarities and just the overlap is incredible. And I think people have sort of noted it. And I've definitely noted it in past series that I've done. I agree with you. Like I'm cosmically positive. I'm kingdom pilled. I love the wonder of the world. I think it's an incredible place. And also I love that you have a physics background, because really physics and Kabbalah are not dissimilar things. They're not really dissimilar things. They're actually almost the same thing, but perhaps just different sort of word forms to describe it. What do you think of that?
I would absolutely agree with that. I would even extend that description to just sort of Hermeticism and the Western sort of occultic tradition in general. It sort of gets a little complicated when you start looking into things like Renaissance Hermeticism and Kabbalah. Sort of they blend into each other, and one would not be mistaken to basically consider them the same thing. Perhaps Hermeticism could be considered the more secularized, humanistic, and Kabbalah would be, of course, having the tradition to the Torah, to the writings of the prophets, to the the Hebrew Bible in general. Of course, that isn't to neglect the Greek-speaking Kabbalistic tradition or even Christian Kabbalah, which are both heavily influenced by more or less the same sort of not necessarily cultural tradition, but approach to this idea that, well, if the Bible really is true, if this really is some kind of a divine document, then it should contain within it the same sort of fractal representation of reality that we would expect from, well, any document that purports to be a sort of be all and end all of spiritual or esoteric wisdom or something like this. Speaking to your point about the Vajrayana Buddhism, I myself do have a bit of a background in the Buddhist tradition, more Zen, if I'm being frank, although I was very interested in Tantric Buddhism for a while, and it pleases me to no end to see the overlap of the traditions, especially when you start looking into the sort of the more mystical aspects, and
Mm-hmm.
start to realize that really the adepts in any true wisdom tradition are going to, share a lot in common with each other. Of course, that isn't to say that Vajrayana does not contain its own unique contributions, because of course it does, and so does Taoism, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I really see the value in the plurality of viewpoints, and I would like to emphasize to the listeners that I'm in no sense attempting to promote Judaism as a religion or as a way of life, or Hasidism or anything like this, or any other form of living, because frankly, in my point of view, every single one of us was imbued with a certain fealty towards certain ways of thinking by the Lord, or by whatever creative, consciously manifesting force you want to consider. And so, and I mean, on an individual level, we all have different neurobiology and neurochemistry, and so certain things will appeal to others. And I believe that it is very much in the plan of the Lord, in his wisdom, that the world would contain this plurality. I hesitate to use the word diversity because of certain connotations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This rich tapestry of potential ideas, which of course should all, in some sense, come back to the same source, while maintaining their individual sort of values. I was really into Advaita Vedanta for a long time, specifically. Now I'm probably going to mess the name up, but Vishishta Advaita, which is the notion that it's non-duality, but with various personages or forms attached to it. So basically, there is one root conscious mind at the center of everything, but there's also a near infinite number of completely unique separate beings which do draw their existence from that ultimate singular mind, but to the degree that they can be considered distinct entities. And this is very much the opinion of Hasidus, and sort of Kabbalah in general, where we see that the Lord, in the truly Kabbalistic language, we might refer to him as, say, Ein Sof. Ein Sof would be the ultimate cause of all material existence, and even supramaterial, because his light flows into all of the many worlds. And what you find is, within the soul of every human being, there's a part which is that belongs to this earth. There's a part which is purely sort of oriented in thought. There's a part that's purely oriented in, say, concept, all the way up to the very top, where there's literally a part of every single person which not only belongs to God, but is God. And I think these ideas are sometimes abused in a form of sort of pantheism, in which it can open the door to, say, self-worship, when in actuality, it's every single one of us is embodying these various aspects of the various levels of worlds, sort of simultaneously, although to one degree or another, the light from those worlds could be distorted or, say, hindered in some way, shape, or form. One question that a lot of people have, this is almost like Philosophy 101, is the problem of evil. People ask themselves, well, if the Lord is ultimately righteous, if the world is a perfect place, why is it then that there seems to be so much corruption in the world? And various attempts have been made over the course of centuries to provide some kind of explanation for this. There's outright dualistic philosophies like Zoroastrianism or Manichaeism, or even modern Christianity, which sort of inherits this notion that, well, on one side you have the perfect good, and this is one singular entity, but then on the other side you have this perfect evil, if you want to say that, perfect in the purely positivistic sense, not in the sense of it's good or something, but this perfect manifestation of evil, on the other hand, which is sort of the devil, or Satan, or something like this. I truly believe that you can look at the world in purely dualistic or purely non-dualistic terms, and you can come to a lot of the same conclusions. So it's not necessarily that one tradition is more correct than the other, but in my way of thinking, and people that sort of adhere to this more essentialist sort of viewpoint, you see evil really as almost being like a condition of existence, less than, say, I'm not denying the existence of evil, say, as a positive force or anything like that, but in my way of thinking, it's very unlikely that there could be this singular supreme power that is somehow able to do everything and understand everything and be everywhere at all times in all space, and yet somehow has this bête noire that he has to contend with, that he can't do anything with. In Hasidism, we have this notion that in the beginning, before any form of creation, it was really just a gigantic void, if you want to consider that, in which God occupies all space, outside of time and outside of any kind of material constraints whatsoever. And through a very insular process, he folded himself sort of to create an environment which you could have interplay between concepts. Of course, in the mind of the Lord, in the ultimate highest possible reality, all things are truly one. And we confirm this every day when we say the Shema. We say Shema Yisrael Yishbrochu Elokeinu Yishbrochu Echad, right? Which really says, hear me, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And we really enforce this idea, and that concept is really relating to the ultimate highest form of creation, in which the light of the Lord truly is one singular point from which it emanates. But in this sort of almost like a matryoshka sort of reality, in which all these worlds are sort of suspended within each other, the Lord created our reality and all of the other realities through a process that in Hasidism we've referred to as Tzimtzum, which is literally a contraction of himself. And in the process of performing this Tzimtzum, there are certain points at which the light from creation becomes, in some sense, unfocused or diffuse, or becomes outright trapped. And this becomes basically the mechanism through which what we refer to in our reality as evil comes about. And this contraction resulted in numerous sort of pseudo-vacuous sort of spaces in which the light from heaven is contained, and there are reasons for that. This is referred to as the Klippa, which all students of any Western esoteric tradition are familiar with. In fact, nowadays you see some people outright, so to speak, worshiping the Klippos.
Very well said. Very well said.
And basically, it's but if there's one singular takeaway that someone listening in the background to this might have from me, I really want to stress the idea that the Klippa, while it is considered in Hasidism to be, say, not good or in some sense negative or even evil, it's a necessary thing that contains within it a spark of holiness, which is so fragile that if the Klippa itself did not exist, then that spark would really have just dissipated into nothing in some sense, because it was, if you think about it, like when you look through different types of glass or something like this, when you look through plastic or something like this, film of some kind, you see the quality of what you're looking at changes quite dramatically. And in a sense, the light that's contained within these Klippos, it's oscillating at a certain frequency that would only be possible within that Klippa. And it's considered to be sort of the mission statement of Hasidim and any real practitioner of any sort of positive tradition, to find these places in which these holy lights have been contained and open them to enable that light to, say, now through some holy process, return back to the Creator. There's a really good meme that I like, which is smash the Klippa, so to speak. That's a little bit on the violent side, perhaps, but it really, if you think about like Link in, Link to the Past or something, throwing like, the jars or something and the smashing sound, that's sort of a nice image for what we would hope to be able to accomplish when we encounter some of these things, because in the game you throw it and you might get some rupees or maybe a heart or something. Well, in this world it's not totally unlike that. You can smash a Klippa and then the holy light returns back up to the upper portions of our realm, and as it continues through to the upper worlds, there will then be a influx of light, not unlike a reflection, that comes back down into the world and fills it with beautiful things. So if anyone needs an incentive to live their life more morally, or more with a more whole-minded, holistic sort of approach, when you uncover the light that's trapped inside of these vessels, it does come back to our world in the form of blessings. And you can sort of see that in the world we're living in today, there's a lot of negativity that is very prevalent, and a lot of this is because the work of finding these vessels and releasing it is only really being done by a small percentage of the population, and unfortunately, in my way of looking at things, and in many other traditions, this sort of abject materialism is a very, very great spiritual ill that rather than even a simple person living in a previous era who maybe didn't have access to the sort of technological capabilities that we have, or even the sort of so-called social progress or whatever that we have today, that person would have been in their day-to-day life um, performing more positive works simply on account of the reality that they're living in. I mean, when you're having to subsist or work hard or be very community or family oriented, even if you're a layperson, you're experiencing, great positive mitzvahs that have a lot of benefit for all of mankind. Whereas the world we're living in today, it's so bizarre. We have the ability to communicate with each other instantaneously. You can find out what's going on anywhere in the world. You could have access to basically any kind of information or, experience anything there is. And it's very sad to see that the great dream of the information superhighway interconnection of all people has really resulted in more insularity, more isolation, more atomism, and moreover, human beings being social creatures, consensus seeking, status seeking, approval seeking. What this inevitably results in is more negative production of these clipos, as more of the divine light that should be being brought down into the world in the form of blessings ends up being trapped in deeper and deeper, more convoluted webs of these clipos. I'll mention the best translation of the word clipo that anyone could possibly imagine, rather than shell, would actually be veil, because what you're really doing when you open a clippa is you're actually revealing it, not unlike a bridegroom who on the wedding with his beloved reveals her face for that first kiss after they've been married. That's why the I think it's better understood, and maybe perhaps even more appealing to an individual, that the klippa could be considered something of a veil, like something that separates the bridegroom from the bride, as opposed to, say, just being a quote unquote another nut to crack or something like that.
It's so interesting that you make that reference to the bridegroom, because I did a series on the Mahavijaya grouping from Nepal, Newari Tantric goddesses, the 10. So when I did Bhuvaneshwari, who is the bridegroom of like the worldly Shiva, but he's the householder version. So he's God brought in to the kingdom through her love, but he always obviously exists there. He wants to go to his formless realm and meditate. That's kind of the idea. So I'm sure you know this, but the idea is she is the bridegroom. The first time she crosses the threshold, she sees the kingdom. It's splendorous. It's wonderful. The light's coming in. She does not fully understand all that she sees. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that reference. And I think that you do a great job of kind of dispelling a lot of fear online, like especially, well, we'll just mention it since you spoke so much on light, that the coming eclipse, which this episode might air afterwards, but regardless, I think that you speak very well on this. And also, you don't have to touch on it in terms of your own work, but I think you do talk a lot about particle physics and sort of a lot of the parapolitics ideas that people have. That's not necessarily based in material reality, but it's kind of based in like these more far-flung ideas. And I'm not saying that they're totally outrageous per se, but that they become outrageous after. It's like the game of telephone online, sort of, right? It becomes something much greater than itself and hyperbolized in specific ways. So I want to say that I really appreciate that you make it very rational. You sort of defeat the klipoth of fear and ignorance. And in Buddhism, in Vajrayana particularly, those are both considered to be maras, klesha maras, the 5 poisons. And we have ways to also break those, sort of, or lift the veil, if we're using that metaphor, or break the vessels. And we also have different tantras that describe it in very, very similar terms. Like the goddess of pottery sort of forms these vessels. There's a primordial couple. They accidentally break the vessels. God gets sort of, or the goddess, depending on your reading of the text. Obviously, Tantra is very dialectical, it's very discursive. So sometimes it depends on your perspective or your view with a capital V on who the main object of who you're understanding the main characters to be. But I just find this idea very perennial, very fascinating. So I do want to say two things. Why I initially followed you was because you said, does anyone have any real questions on the Sephirah? And I did a little smart ass thing because I'm so used to dealing with esoteric Twitter who really, they do worship the Qliphoth. That is kind of their focus. So I made a little bit of a, we'll say, asshole comment, but it was kind of funny. And it was, what are the negative qualities of Chesed? And you were, there are no negative qualities. And I was like, okay, well, I have to follow this person because it's the same response that I would have expected from someone who understood, rather than someone being, oh, this is like how to access the dark goddesses or whatever. I've always appreciated that about you, that you do kind of dispel, I think, a lot of darkness and mystification. And I think that's so important, especially with the things we're talking about and what's going on in the world. I think there's so much mystification and so much, and it is a negative diffusion of light, if you want to sort of say it in that way, or people's perceptions of things are not correct because it's not readily apparent. And so you form opinions based on perceptions which aren't necessarily accurate to the form.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that very much, Jin. Thank you very much. And I do remember that. And I didn't interpret your comment as snarky or anything like that. I thought it was quite a genuine uh, thing to ask, and I appreciate that that we did sort of hit it off from that point. And I really do want to speak to the concept of fear. It's very obvious that we're living in a time of extreme anxiety, extreme paranoia, extreme mistrust, and you'd have to be a pretty naive person not to see at least some justification in why there is so much sort of worry or anxiety about certain things, especially given that, as you stated, we are living in a time when a lot of people are getting second, third, fourth, fifth, 20th hand sources for information, and it's almost like a spiritual game of telephone, where by the time the information has arrived, it's like a copy of a poorly translated concept of a copy of whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, that itself contains a certain level of pathology because, all true students of mysticism are always trying to go back to, some original source or some pure teaching or something like this. But it's kind of, again, I mentioned this in a different post about something a little while ago. Someone was complaining that, everyone today is autistic, everyone today is high IQ, etc. But I really do think that there is, if you consider the distribution of comprehension in the world. I mean, Robert Anton Wilson used to say, "What's the Illuminati secret of power? Think about how dumb the average person is. Well, mathematically speaking, half of all people are even dumber than that." So it's a joke. I'm a big Robert Anton Wilson fan. But basically, I don't want to phrase it in the form of intelligence because, frankly, I'm not convinced that that's the most important attribute in the entire world.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but the point is, there's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety around a lot of concepts, and some of it outright encouraged because it's sort of a bit, it's cool or edgy to sort of look at the negative view of things, especially in the esoteric tradition.
Yes.
Everybody wants to be left-hand path. Everybody wants to be the next Crowley or Anton LaVey or something like this. Not that that's necessarily the worst possible pursuit, but especially when you consider the backgrounds of a lot of these people that do get involved in these more negative traditions, it's often sort of a form of escapism from their kind of material circumstances and whatnot, maybe rebelling against their parents or other authority figures. Where I live in Quebec, there's a lot of anti-Roman Catholic sentiment because at some point, until relatively recently, the province itself was very heavily sort of socially controlled by these Catholic concepts. So the society is sort of overcorrected to some degree or another by more or less throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And of course, every era goes through various sort of revolutions in concepts and ideologies. Secularism is really a much more recent innovation than I think most people realize. I mean, if we really want to get down to it, even the concept of nations and countries themselves are a relatively recent idea. People are often shocked when you tell them, like, well, you know, up until like the early 1900s, Germany was a kingdom. You know, like Germany, the country, was only, you know, 20 years old, 30 years old prior to the Second World War. Whereas today, because we're living in sort of a post World War sort of epoch, we sort of take it for granted. Like, here's the map, here's Europe, this is this country, this is that country, and it's very much the same thing with sort of ideological or cultural constructs as well. We sort of take for granted that the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, we're only really 150, 200 years ago. I mean, guys like Blaise Pascal were relatively, you know, or Jean Rousseau, for example, effectively the father of modern sort of classical liberal ideology, leading to these concepts, which are now, you know, present in every single nation: fraternity, equality, you know, or equality rather, and these other concepts. These are all relatively modern ideas. I mean, today they seem kind of a little bit old hat because we consider pretty much anything that's 150, 200 years old to be old. But if you look on the grand scheme of human history, I mean, a lot of these ideas are as recent as, you know, TikTok on the grand scheme of things. Yeah, a lot of fear. Now, online, of course, not just online, but in the media sphere in general, fear is really what puts the butts in seats, so to speak. That's what gets people sitting down, eyes glued to the TV. Like, think about what the pandemic was like. At no point during the pandemic was there a rational, you know, constructive view taken, like, well, we're just trying to figure things out as a society. You know, we're dealing with something that you know, we haven't encountered before, and we're going to, you know, explore, you know, what the most viable options are. No, of course it was stay inside. You're going to die, as if dying is the worst thing that could ever happen to you, right? But no, I mean, the joke that I was making during the pandemic is people are going to stay inside until finally we find a cure for death. You know, like, we're going to cure death and then we're going to restart society again. No, so, you know, especially with certain esoteric ideas, it's pretty easy to sort of descend into the negative. Like, you know, speaking to the concept of chesed, for example, a universally positive sephira. I mean, all the sephiros are completely positive in the sense of embodying no contradictory concepts. So when I say positive, I don't necessarily mean good, although in the sense of the 11 sephiros, they are universally positive, good things. But of course, in the world we're living in today, we have a lot of twisted chesed. There's a lot of pathological altruism.
Yes.
A lot of, like, you know, concern trolling.
Yes.
A lot of hyper moralism, pearl clutching, beating people over the head with whatever the event du jour is, whatever the on the stack of socially acceptable virtues, because of course we're living in a very atheistic, very materialistic society. So, but you still have to have your hierarchy of you know, transcendental moralism, even in the absence of any sort of, like, a Platonic virtue or anything like that. So now I mean, again, I struggle to universally condemn these things because, I think that ultimately there is a positive aspect to even some of the pathological behavior that you see in the society today. Like, for example, anxiety and fear, given, in their purest form, are, things that can completely ruin your life, ruin your relationships, ruin your ability to interface with other people. But then on the other hand, there's a sort of protective aspect of that where, fear is something that traditionally speaking has been used by societies to maintain boundaries, keep out potential negative influences, protect children, etc. So again, there is what sort of makes the current epoch that we're living in kind of complicated is that there is clearly something there that is valuable. And again, this goes back to the notion of the klippa. So fear itself is like a klippa that contains within it something valuable, which is, love thy neighbor, or care for children, or protect the values of your society, or something like this. But then when the klippa is allowed to sort of metastasize and become like a tumor in society, that's when you get things like rampant hyper-materialism leading to, people who, lack a basic fundamental, ontological concept of what their existence is, no real kind of epistemical sort of framework in which like they derive their identity or something. People just sort of take for granted, like, yes, I look in the mirror, I see hands, I see a face, this is me, this thing that I'm looking at is me, as opposed to, understanding that there's a very mysterious, weird aspect to reality which is not so easily dismissed, except if you ignore it outright. Like, this has always been, in my opinion, and again, I'm not trying to bully any potential atheists or any anti-theists or anybody that rejects any kind of spiritual concepts or whatever by any stretch. I'm not attempting to do that, but it's quite apparent that when you to me, there's a philosophical contradiction in sort of going like, well, everything about existence is normal because that's what I'm embedded in. And I just take it for granted that I am this, primate creature that has, this deep internal sort of mental consciousness process. All of that is some emergent characteristic that happens because I just so happen to have like a sufficient density of, neurological connection or something inside of my brain. And actually, if you were to, turn off one gene, I'd basically be, a consciousless, just mechanical biological system. And I think it's a really arrogant viewpoint. Actually, even amongst other Jewish people, I've gotten a little bit of flack over the years when I try to talk to them about the notion that even something like an insect, or like say a butterfly, I've observed these creatures in nature having what could only be described as, very conscious awareness of what is happening in their environment. I mean, I would go so far as to say even things like crystal growth and other sort of processes that we associate with, purely mechanical or chemical processes. I would go so far as to say that those are an expression of consciousness. I mean, even amongst like atheistic sort of secularized people, there's this notion of a Boltzmann brain, like, oh, the sun is the most complicated physical process going on, or any star for that matter, that we're aware of. And so, if the sun is this extremely complicated plasmatic gravitational phenomena, then it could be something of a massive mind. And when I hear somebody say something like that, I think you're almost there. In actuality, even a grain of sand has consciousness. And that's one of the most offensive memes to me personally is this notion that gets thrown around in AI circles of quote unquote, we made sand think, which to me just expresses the peak arrogance of a hardcore materialist that somehow like as if we are responsible for electricity or why any of these things even work in the first place. Like, oh, well, actually computer chips are a man-made idea and they don't exist in nature. And you're like, well, what's a cell? What is any sort of complicated material system? We didn't invent the laws of physics. We certainly did not invent the concept. I mean, we put names to things, electricity or nuclear forces or something like this. But as Richard Feynman said, putting a name on something says nothing about the process itself. In fact, in many ways, putting a name on it limits it in some sense. As a parallel, in the esoteric tradition, there's this idea that if you know something's true name, you have control over it. And that's or at least you understand something very deep about it. And that is true, but, you could argue that the false names, so to speak, the human concepts that we associate with certain things, they have almost the opposite ability. They sort of separate you from the thing itself. The concept that Feynman gives is related to, seeing a particular bird, and I believe it was a grackle or something like that. And, someone looks at it and says, well, that's a grackle. And it's like, well, by saying that, you've now tricked yourself into believing you know what that thing is, merely because you put a name on it. And this, again, it speaks to a serious materialistic problem with AI in general, which is AI is effectively just really efficient data labeling, which is, if you follow what I just said, more or less equivalent to just putting a fake name on everything. So AI, in a sense, the way that it's being applied, especially with LLMs and, sort of data-oriented training processes, it's really reducing concepts to their absolute least valuable, least fulfilled, least activated forms for the sake of pure tokenization. And I really truly feel sorry for anyone that thinks that that's how the human mind works. You want to say, well, perhaps your mind works like that because, you weren't in a situation at any point in your life in which you were allowed to see the world for what it was. You were in a harsh, mechanistic environment that saw basically, information that has some sort of utility as being the only valuable thing, and anything that has to do with feeling or sense or intuition or appreciation or anything like this, these are all, they have negative shareholder value, and so therefore they're not valuable. And it's really quite tragic to see how this so-called techno-accelerationist movement, which again is not inherently negative. I mean, I myself, in many ways, would be considered an accelerationist. But the way that it sort of worships money, worships this centralized, hyper-capitalist corporate agenda in which, like, human beings just become basically just individual units of value production, and you're only as necessary to society as you're able to provide some sort of return on investment for whatever company owns you. And I think a lot of people really don't think about the ramifications of this viewpoint and what the ultimate outcome will be. I myself don't share a lot of sympathies with, say, extreme Marxism or anything like this. I am very familiar with Marxism, communism, socialism. I would have been considered an adherent for some period of my life, but what sort of broke the spell, so to speak, is the recognition that these viewpoints see people as really nothing more than labor, which defines how much of your existence. Like, to what degree are you defined by your ability to make widgets? I would argue, like, very, very little. Everything valuable about human existence, like what we're doing right now, I mean, okay, it's a podcast, it's something that you can put online, it's potentially monetizable, etc. Okay, whatever. That's the nature of the thing. But ultimately, what gives it value is that we're having a real connection, an authentic experience, and we're exchanging ideas freely in a way that, we both find, whether we agree with each other, whether we disagree with each other, whether, there's some particular thing either one of us wants to say or something like that. We're having a real social experience, and your listeners are right along with us, having it alongside us, and that's really what gives the thing value. It's really not the other kind of secondary and tertiary and quaternary sort of aspects of it. And I think it's really a shame that the real essential characteristics of most of our existence are seemingly being stripped away, reduced to, again, they're only the aspects of it that are purely mercantile, that are purely value oriented. And I think when people talk about, the state of the world today as being somewhat negative versus previous epochs, that's, in my opinion, what they're really drawing attention to. Because even, several hundred years ago, when, say, you had to wake up at 3 a.m. to make breakfast for your family, or, go hunting, or, whatever the case may be, depending on your society or culture at the time, even if the aspects of their life were more harsh, there was still a more essentialist sort of characteristic that, just by the nature of the way the social connection was oriented, people had a more advanced, deeper spiritual understanding of the world they lived in. Whereas today, as we sort of started out with on this portion of the talk, fear and materialism is what truly dominates. And I can't even mention the word fear without coming back to materialism, because, as all true students of esotericism know, there's literally nothing in this world to be afraid of. Death is, to a degree, an illusion. It's a change of forms. It is a state. Material circumstances are in many ways determined by our perspective on the world, which makes them directly informed by consciousness. And the state of the society that we're living in is heavily influenced by the concepts that someone is willing to accept. So, to me, it's and part of it's a little bit frustrating, but a part of my sort of everyday struggle with being on social media, or just interacting with people in general in my day-to-day life, is people seem to be very accepting of the negative aspects of their circumstances, even the ones that were not necessarily prevalent even a few years ago, but very wary about actually putting their physical and mental energy into producing any other sort of outcome. And I think this sort of demoralization is a direct influence of the Klippa, especially the ones around Gebra, Chesed, Chokmah, the twisted logic, so to speak, and of course even twisted Das, because you have people who are part of these traditions, or even just materialists. Like science, for example, is very much in Das. Very much in Tiferet, very much in Malchus, right up the whole thing, basically from Malchus all the way, Yesod all the way up to Kesser. That's where the scientific process is really rooted, and you can see how this understanding of the divine nature of reality gets contorted and twisted into this very materialistic way of looking at the world, which sees everything maybe in terms of cause and effect, but really as material consequences, which are in some sense bad, or limiting us in some degree. And to a lot of degree, that's actually, to a lot of level, that's actually true, because there really are these limiting forces in our lives that are sort of a necessary consequence of the material world, or what we call in Hasidism, we call it Asiya, which is the world of action, the lowest of all the worlds. that isn't to say that lowest means worst. That's a very incorrect way to look at it, because there are souls in higher realms like Yatsura and Beriah, and those souls, they yearn to come down into this world. They desire it. They want it. It's not like a purely Gnostic point of view, like, oh, these are bodies of light that are coming from the pleroma and they're trapped in the kanoma, and there's this demiurge that rules over it. I mean, in many ways, the demiurge is like a natural consequence of the Simsum that I was mentioning before, because as I said, it's contorted or twisted or in some way kaleidoscopic transmissions of this pure and holy light that comes from on high. And but again, it gets trapped in these forms, and if you do not possess either the social or spiritual or psychological or personal machinery necessary to confront these things for what they are, then, as I said, the klippa can metastasize, and it becomes a major deciding factor in the course of history. I mean, wars are fought over this person's klippa versus that person's klippa.
Incredibly well said. I'm so glad you brought up, we'll call it the hidden sphere, Doth, Tibereth, Malkuth, and obviously Chokmah. I'm very interested in this idea of Chokmah as not that the sphere itself is negative, but maybe a klippa of the sphere is sort of this mystification in smoke. I know that that's a very tantric idea. I made the case for that being true in my own series, but maybe you'll disagree. But I personally found that to be sort of like a ruling archon, not the sphere itself, obviously, but there's an idea there that people can get stuck in as this kind of like mystification of reality through unverified personal gnosis, maybe, or what they would say is wisdom, but it's a commodified wisdom.
I really like that you use the word archon, because I totally agree. And I should mention, but I certainly do believe in culture and family and community, and I definitely don't condemn people whose primary motivation is to protect the ones that they love, and that sometimes turns out to be members of your own ethnicity or something like this. Of course, it would be lovely to live in a world in which people did not feel the need to defend themselves from outside forces or something like this. But to one degree or another, every single person is under siege in the world right now. But anyway, so I was going to mention the interview with John Lash I heard many years ago, in which he was really one of the first people, I think, that was really throwing around the word archon in the context of, say, in the context of, say, our material reality and such, really resurrecting some of these Valentinian and proto-Christian sort of concepts that come from, say, Greek and the earlier Pythagorean and mystical tradition that was prevalent prior to the Christian epoch. So not just Chokmah, I would say, but again, that's recently there's been a lot of kerfuffle because of the tunnels in New York that Chabad. It's interesting from the point of view of a Hussid who I don't really pay that much attention to what's going on in the secular world a lot of the time, but to see, like, all of a sudden, like, wait, why am I hearing, like, why is Chabad trending on Twitter, for example? So Chabad itself, I don't want to speak to the organization too much, because I myself am not an adherent to the organization, although for full transparency, I have spent a lot of time in Chabad. I know a lot of Chabad rabbis. A lot of them are very good friends of mine. Chabad is very good to me. They treat me very well, and they treat my family very well. But I am more of an adherent to spiritual Chabad, which is Bina Das. So why is Chabad called Chabad? Well, again, there are 7 faculties of the human soul, which correspond to the 7 Sephiros that we've spoken of. The ones we haven't mentioned today are Netzach. I mentioned Gevurah, but maybe so you mentioned Hod, but so now that I've said Netzach, we've mentioned all of the Sephiros. But the idea is, so Chokmah really is wisdom, and Bina is understanding. So as you mentioned with this smoke, it's exactly as you described, where you can have this sort of like diffusion of ideas, where like if you've ever been to a rock show or a rave or anything like that, and they have smoke machines with lasers going through them, well, the only reason why you can see the lasers is because there's something there in the air for it to adhere to. When you watch a movie and there's like a laser sight or something like this on a guy, it usually shows it as a beam of some kind. But in actuality, if there's nothing for the laser, if there's nothing in the environment for the light to sort of get trapped in or be absorbed by or to bounce off of or something like this, you actually can't see it. So in a sense, these, if you want to call them twisted spiritual traditions, are, again, it's a klippa that is containing within it like a really valuable essential idea, which in the case of, say, so speaking to the notion of obfuscation, I try my best to explain everything in the most simple language that I'm enabled to. Sometimes, especially in the case of physics and mathematics, there's only so far that you can reduce something, and then you're no longer talking about the thing anymore. Like after a certain point, you're not talking about the concept, you're talking about someone's comprehension of just language in general, and you're trying to sort of boilerplate the idea to it. But fortunately, when it comes to spiritual ideas, because our language itself is a klippa. Like we are expressing divine concepts, explaining deeply spiritual things to each other, even when you're going to the grocery store or something like that. Every single aspect of our world is sacred, and every single concept is got this core of divine light inside of it that comes literally right from the highest worlds. So Bina is Chokhmah and Bina together, when they're not utilized correctly. Those, by the way, those klippos, those sephiros don't actually belong to the human soul exactly. They do, but they're actually faculties of the intellect. So the human soul is composed of the 7 sub-sephiros, which kind of sit below them, and it's through Chokmah and Bina, because we don't actually have access to Kesser in the purest sense. We have to filter Kesser through Chokmah and Bina, which is to say our wisdom and understanding, and then it's the unification of those 2 Sephiros which opens the hidden one, Das, and Das sits right between Tiferet, which is beauty, and Kesser, which is of course the crown. Perhaps on another episode we can talk about how the different worlds, like how Asiya, the world we're living in, becomes Yetzirah, and there's that point, Kesser, in which it's sort of occupying sort of 2 worlds simultaneously, because it's really the gateway through which the transmission of spiritual light is really allowed to enter into this world. So in that sense, that's why we're not really able to access Kesser in the purest sense, because being that we ourselves are an emanation of Kesser, we can't really embody it. But because we have the ability to enter Kesser, again, directly through Tiferet or through the unification of the faculties of the intellect, which are Chokmah, Bina, and Das, we can actually project ourselves consciously into the higher realms. And in the higher realms, they have their own Sephiros, which are like mirrors of the ones that we have on Earth. And it goes, like I said, all the way up to the top, where at the very highest level of existence, even above. So you have Atzilus, but then above that you have this thing called Adam Kadmon, and you find out that at the highest possible level is one singular grand human being that we are all emanating from. And this is the idea where it says, in Torah, let us make man in our image after our likeness. He's literally referring to the divine man. And so, a lot of the kerfuffle between Judaism and Christianity is really more about aesthetic tastes, because in the highest possible comprehension of Hasidism, or in Torah itself, God really is a man, a singular. But I mean, I would go so far as to say we're not humans. He's human. We strive to be human. So when people say God isn't a man, it's like, well, he's actually the only man. We're trying to get there. So you are so right that the obfuscation of these concepts in which, like again, how does the Illuminati work? How do the Freemasons work? How does all this stuff work? It's all about, well, if you come here at this meeting, do this thing, do the handshake, whatever, you get your third degree. Now you're no longer a neophyte. Now you're, let's bring you into the OTO or something like this. They can, it's sort of like they have a thing they could just come out and tell you, but if they were to tell you on day one what's going on, everybody would run away. Nobody would join something like the OTO or Freemasonry if they told you what the ultimate secret of the 12th degree or 33rd degree is on day one. You'd be like, oh, well, all right. And then you just would go about your day. So they have to structure it in such a way that the obfuscation becomes like a sort of a stepladder that you use to sort of bring adherence into your practice. And frankly, I understand the necessity of clothing certain concepts to make them, say, not necessarily accessible immediately. Like, for example, in physics or mathematics, you're not really going to go from, say, counting your fingertips to doing, like, algebraic geometry in one step. And it's very much like that with any esoteric tradition. You're not going to open the Bible and read one line and all of a sudden be able to do miraculous, works of healing or have this deep, you could hypothetically do miraculous works of healing, but that would be within you from the beginning. But the point is there's a degree to which there is a necessity in there being sort of sequences of certain things. And again, it's not negative to go through a process of learning. It is not negative to be part of a tradition in which, like, there's an apprentice sort of aspect to it or something like this. But where it becomes really potentially destructive is when it's sort of like an onion where, like, it's like a clippa and then a clippa and then a clippa and then a clippa and then a clippa, and there's no actual core to it. And again, if you have the smell, if you've got the smell test down, you can pretty much, like, get a whiff of more or less anything and figure out immediately, like, am I talking to someone who has something really valuable and they're just storing it because it's really fragile information, and if you were to just spill it all over the place, it would actually open you to, potential attack or, even damage the concept in some way. I myself feel a little bit of fealty to that because in my, musical tradition, I've sort of structured things in such a way that when you listen to our first album, you sort of learn how to listen to our music, so that on subsequent releases, you'll have sort of the skeleton key for understanding our music. So I'm very sympathetic to the idea that you can't just necessarily jump in the deep end. You need to do the first swimming lessons. On the other hand, there's this idea that nothing really is anything, and it's all just Maya, or all just nothingness or something like this. Not that nothingness in, say, Kabbalah is inherently nothing. I mean, Ein Sof is literally nothingness, but it's a form of active void, if you want to think about it like this. So again, there's a lot of ways that you can control people. One of them is to give them sort of backwards information or incomplete information or something and sort of get them hooked and make them come back for more. And I would say a lot of organizations and traditions do have a sort of nefarious angle to them, which is, again, relating back to the Klippa. The good part of it is they're trying to encourage their own existence. They're trying to propagate. It's like, be fruitful and multiply, but applied to an intellectual aspect. So again, even with the darkest of the dark klippos, there's always some aspect to it which is pure, and that's what needs to be revealed. And so, unfortunately, a lot of traditions will not survive the revelation because the what is inside of them doesn't belong to them. And I think that's where obfuscation becomes a sort of self-preservation technique.
Well, that was incredibly well said. I think that is a great place to end it. But I want to say one thing, or two things really. I did not, people have heard me who've listened to the show, have heard me refer to the synthesis between Binah and Tokmah resulting in death, knowledge. And so people have heard me say this, and I just want to say I didn't get it from you. I got it from my own studies, but it is very edifying to hear that you repeat that same idea because it is the idea. And also the idea of the matryoshka or the Russian nesting dolls. I have used that to explain the densities of the spheres before to someone who didn't have any background. So I feel like we all use analogies or allegories in very similar ways. And we have the idea of the Adi Buddha, who's like the Buddha of the void, like it's like consciousness beyond consciousness. It's almost like non-consciousness, void consciousness, but there is still something there. So I do understand when you're saying like a negative void or like existence beyond our conception of existence, like ineffability. That totally makes sense to me. So thank you so much, Tsotchke, and please come back and like discuss more of the spheres, more parapolitics, more particle physics, more music, more everything, because we didn't even really get into like
You didn't get
what
to
you
the
really
Sailor
know.
Moon thing at all. If you want to ask me a quick question about that, I could that one to the end.
On the next episode, we will start with the Sailor Moon question, and then we will move on from there, and we can even use that as a reference if you want to kind of understanding the spheres, because I think that's such a great reference point for colors. Not that the spheres necessarily have colors, but they're associated with colors. So I just think that this is going to be so fantastic for people who have really never heard this material, and I really appreciate that you came on and really laid it out like in a really excellent way, and I really have no disagreement. So that's pretty rare for me.
Well, just to give the listeners a potential treat, the whole princess, crystal millennium angle. So I just want to read a little bit passage here from a book called Likhte Amarim. Basically, the guidebook for the Siddhis, at least from the point of view of Abad Chachma Bina Bhat's viewpoint. The book was written by the Alter Rebbe. So in chapter 39, there's a mention I want to. I'm going to not read it exactly. I'm going to sort of. This applies specifically to neshamos, which are pure soul aspect of your embodiment of faculties, God or Chokmah and Bina, but on that higher level that's rooted in the upper world. This applies specifically to neshamos, which possess great cognition, as it were. As for the category of the ruach of the righteous, those who serve God without fear, and those who have love in their hearts, they do not ascend thither, referring to the upper world of Jia, except on Shabbos and the new moon, by means of the pillar that rises from the lower to the higher Garden of Eden, i.e. the which is called the higher Garden of Eden, wherein to take pleasure in God and derive enjoyment from the splendor of his indwelling. For the intellect of a created being can have no enjoyment or pleasure except in what it conceives, understands, knows, and apprehends with its intellect and apprehension, what is possible for it to understand and grasp of the light of the blessed Ein Sof by virtue of his blessed wisdom and understanding which shines forth in the world. Yeah. That reason that these souls merit to ascend higher than the angels, even through their service, has been with no more natural fear and love than it is through their fear shine forth, namely their love of him and dread and fear of him, are Tikkun and Etz Chaim by Rabbi Vidal, writing the writings of the Arizal, that the six Sephiros nest in the world of Yetzirah. Therefore, it is the constant service of the angels, resting neither by day nor by night, to stand in fear and dread. And but in the world of Berea shines forth Chokmah, Bina, and Das of the blessed Ein Sof, which are the source of the midot, or qualities, and their mother and root, as is stated in Tikkunim, that Ima Ilah nests, which is the supernal or divine mother, if you want, it's like the feminine, motherly aspect of God, nests in the three Sephiros in the divine throne, in the world of Berea. Therefore, this is the abode of souls of the righteous, serve God with both fear and love, which are derived from the understanding and knowledge and greatness of the blessed Ein Sof. This love is called Reyuta de Liba, is heart's desire, and it is a garment of the soul in the world of Berea, which, as we said previously, the higher Garden of Eden is united with the 10 Sephiros of both Berea and Yetzirah, it being the glow of the very Torah and service for the reward of commandment is the commandment itself.
That was incredibly beautiful. I'm maybe a junior student of Ramak, so I have like parsed Pardes before, and probably not densely, but I feel like I took away some incredible insights into the interaction between the spheres, the colors that he associated with them, and the ineffability of God, and how it's a really beautiful system. And I don't think they're all exactly the same, but I do think that there are truths, flowers, seeds. A garden can be grown from the knowledge that is contained within them. On that note, why don't you plug everything that you have, and I will make sure it's in the show notes. And again, thank you so much. Honestly, you did an incredible job. It makes me want to like become better at Kabbalah. It makes me want to wisdom sciences in a more with even more fervor, I will say, than I already do, which is already extensive. So, so anyways, go ahead, plug your all of everything, Tsotchke, and I'll make sure it's in the show notes for everybody to check out.
Jim, that's very kind of you to say, and I certainly do appreciate. Again, I play guitar and I sing, and I'm the principal songwriter for my band Glass Classic. You can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on pretty much any of the major platforms. _glass _classic _ and it's the same user on both Instagram and Twitter. We are woefully underrepresented online, and I mostly use our Twitter account and my own personal account at Tsotchke to be a sort of a platform mostly for media theory, cultural criticism, and just sort of having fun in general. I mean, we're really about encouraging levity on our social media presence. We do occasionally end up in flame wars with people I know.
It happens.
All in good fun. Our new album is coming out this summer, Hands of Esau. It will be released on a reputable label, of which we're not 100% sure who that's going to be, but it will be available in all physical formats, vinyl, CD, have you. Should also be available for purchase via the major streaming platforms, Apple Music, etc. Perhaps we'll have it on Spotify. I'm not sure about that, but I do want to mention, this is a surprise for the listeners, we're also releasing a brand new EP next month, which we are self-releasing on Transmission Nova, a record label related to the We At New movement, that We Are the New Underground. And that's going to be available on Spotify. It's going to be available potentially on CD. for people to pick up. And that's actually a totally different set of music from what we have on Hands of Esau, and it sort of represents sort of more of the recent transitional sort of hard rock stuff that we're doing this, more recently. We're sort of still in the process of evolving to our ultimate form. The ultimate version of Glass Classic will probably be a 5-piece band, just due to the density of our arrangements. But we encourage everyone to come follow us on social media, share our material, watch our videos. I highly recommend, if you want one of our videos that's on YouTube, you watch the video for Beneath the Trees. That's by far our most progressive song, and definitely a real gem out of what is already a fairly magnanimous, fairly splendorous set of songs available. I will continue to post physics information with regards to ongoing research at the LHC, dark matter research, and anything related to mathematics, information technology, AI, and the sort of the ways that these concepts are sort of rapidly making their way into the public milieu. Your listeners can always count on me to do my best to dispense information in the most appropriate and thorough way possible. I try to make all of these concepts as accessible to everyone as possible, and despite how unapproachable I might sometimes seem to some people, I'm very friendly, and I'm willing to talk with pretty much anyone who has an appreciation for the subject, although, to be completely honest, I don't really enjoy getting into arguments with people. And aside from that, get to know me, and there will likely be all kinds of really interesting things. I also have various other projects. My music career goes back almost 20 years, and so there's a lot of things to discover. We've been pretty active producing various types of music art for a long time. I have associations with certain art collectives and like this, so getting into us is maybe not the most beginner friendly thing in the entire world for some people, but Glass Classic can be a stepping stone to a world of art, music, and thinking that many people today maybe think isn't so available. So I encourage anyone who listens to this podcast, come check us out, come follow me on Twitter, and just join the fun. And never forget, the moonlight is a message of love.
Hey, this is Jin the Ninja, and if you enjoyed the show, you can check out more episodes on Spotify and Anchor, and you can check me out on Twitter at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, and on Instagram at Threshold Saints. And there's a link tree in the show notes, so you can check out all my appearances and my shows to date.